Hi, everyone, and welcome to Innovation Insider. Today's guest is Gretchen Masters, a leader who spent the last decade at the intersection of corporate health, insurance, and innovation. She's currently head of advisory for Mercer Marsh Benefits in the Pacific, where she works with organisations across sectors to reimagine how they approach workforce health and wellbeing. Gretchen's career has spanned product development, wellbeing strategy, and digital health transformation, with roles at major insurers and consulting powerhouses. Along the way, she's developed a reputation for cutting through fluff, advocating for evidence-based health interventions, and helping businesses turn good intentions into outcomes that matter. Welcome, Gretchen.
Excellent. Thanks for having me. It's good to be here.
Thanks for joining. Lovely to have you on board. We'll get straight into it. And the first question that I ask most guests on the podcast here is, what do you believe are the key factors that drive successful innovation within complex organisations?
Look, I would say the key factors for innovation, full stop, whether it's a complex organisation or otherwise, is the perfect combination of curiosity and process. That's even more important than funding. It doesn't matter if there aren't big budgets available for innovation. It really comes down to that curiosity. And then I guess the process comes in because you need to get out of the boardroom, break free from the walls, get out of your own discussions and meeting rooms and really engage with customers and be looking to understand what goes wrong, what drives them crazy, what keeps them up at night, what problems do they have, and really start to focus on how you can solve those problems.
And where do you think, on curiosity, by the way, I agree wholeheartedly that curiosity is a critical ingredient. How do you embed curiosity through an organisation?
I think that is hands down the biggest challenge. Because too often what you see in an organisation is they start with a solution, starting with curiosity, seeking to understand the problem, is quite vague and quite broad and could leave an organisation wide open to finding a solution that they don't want to be providing. So it's about embedding curiosity in every part of the organisation, not just in innovation. So I guess it's that safe environment so people can ask questions, values, no question's a stupid question. It's, speak up. And it's about role modelling as well. I think it's really important that the higher you get in an organisation, the more open you are about the questions that you ask. So you're showing you don't need to have all the answers. That's not something to be proud of. It's more important to be interested and to be curious. And so I guess it's about getting it into the DNA and making sure everyone in the organisation truly is living and breathing it.
Yeah, I think you're onto something there. I think leadership by example is critically important there. If your leadership in the organisation, it probably starts with the board, I guess, if they're curious and they reward curiosity, and rewarding curiosity probably sounds a little bit difficult, but rewarding curiosity, I guess, is probably by responding with curiosity and enabling people to ask questions and not necessarily feel like they need to have the answer or be the smartest person in the room.
Yeah, and I think that reward for curiosity can simply be praised when you're a leader. If someone's willing to be uncomfortable and speak up and ask a question that may be perceived to be a stupid question, then as a leader, you can really praise that curiosity and encourage more of it.
Yeah, no, I agree. And then talk to me about process. So process, if I'm a worker in an organisation in a reasonably structured role, predictable day to day, and then I've got someone who's focused on innovation, and that might be innovation through improving processes, it might be finding efficiencies, finding growth opportunities, whatever it is in the organisation. The word innovation is probably incorrectly tied to unstructure, looseness.
Yeah. Beanbags.
I'll say fun. Like, not that fun is the enemy, but like I'm a guy who thinks like process is fun. Don't get me wrong, but why is process so important for innovation?
Look, innovation done well needs that structure. It needs, it often starts quite broad or quite divergent, where you really are going out to the market and understanding customer problems and ideating on ideas, and I guess doing what a lot of people think of as the really fun part of innovation. And when there's a misunderstanding, people will think it stops there. But then you need to converge again and sort of narrow that down and think about, okay, what could we as a company do to solve this problem? And then from there, you can diverge again. But it's that structure, and I guess that aligning that with functional timelines. So you don't need to know what the solution will be in, call it 4 weeks' time. But in 4 weeks' time, there needs to be a short list of opportunities on the table that can be presented to senior executives or to the board. So it becomes quite a productive process when it's aligned to really nice tight timelines and clear milestones. The biggest challenge for senior leaders in an organization is understanding that you'll get something at this point in time, but you don't actually know what the something is.
Yeah, and I guess that's where it couples well with curiosity, right? You need leadership to be curious and go, okay, you don't have the answer now, but I just need to know that you will have an answer.
Yeah.
But they need to enable you to go and find that answer. But I think that structure, you even just talking about, you've talked about process, you've sort of gone into timing, but I think you've sort of hinted there on things like governance and decision making, and those sort of things are actually all part of that process, right?
Yeah, and it's where things like guiding principles or guardrails can come in, and being clear on scope from the beginning. So it's not that senior leaders or the board have no say. They could be very clear about what is absolutely out of scope and not to be considered as a solution. And it's great because that narrows down the round thinking a little bit and creates a bit of clarity. So it's not just scribbles on a whiteboard. It really does need to have some guardrails in place to be functional and be practical at the end.
Yeah, nice one. Okay, so if all it takes is curiosity and process, why is it so damn hard? Why do so many organizations get it wrong?
I think a really common issue is a misunderstanding of what innovation actually is. And people potentially confuse innovation as a process with innovative ideas. But, if another company had an idea a few years ago and they innovated and took something great to market, and you decide to do something similar, is that innovation, or is that just delivering a product or service that you've decided to develop? And so often it goes wrong because it starts at the top and it starts with an idea based around a solution, rather than starting with that curiosity and that openness to seek the right solution. It's, in the end, it should be something novel. It needs to be new, it needs to be fresh, and it can be incredibly simple, which is why I said curiosity and process is more important than budget. It can be something so simple that is quite a breakthrough innovation, but often innovation almost gets pumped up too much. So it becomes this great big shiny thing that needs investment, it's perceived it needs to be digital a lot of the time. And it's that misunderstanding that can really, really derail it. I've seen examples where someone at the top of an organization has a bright idea, and next thing you know, there are teams of people being hired to bring that idea to life. And they consider themselves working on innovation, where I would argue they're just working on delivery.
Yeah, that's a really good delineation, and I've certainly lived and breathed that a number of times, as I'm sure many people who've worked in the trenches have absolutely understood, lived it, been incredibly frustrated by that. I'm curious if you're maybe two angles on this. If you're a leader, a corporate leader, and you're trying to uplift the innovation corporate capability of your organization, and you've got a million ideas, and I often say this, like, this is one of the problems that we face in our consultancy quite often is that many businesses have too many ideas, because ideas are free. There's no barrier to having an idea, right? Like that is just great. That's great that you've got 150 ideas. But that's exactly like you say, that's not being innovative. That's not innovation. That's just putting sticky notes on a board or writing a bunch of stuff down, or copying what someone's done in another market or whatever, which is fine. Sometimes they have merit, and you've got to start somewhere. I think innovation being largely ill-defined, like you say, is not necessarily, it's just not just idea generation. And perhaps mistakenly, when we think of innovation, if you type in innovation into like emojis, you probably get a light bulb, right? Because it's probably we do probably mistakenly link ideation with innovation, and that's just a small part of what innovation is or should be. So I think that's real. And I think the other thing that resonated was you sort of said that we're often we've got that idea, we execute on that idea with actually missing the innovative part in the middle, which is this a good idea? Have we got a competitive advantage? How do we take it to market? Is it right for us? What's it going to cost? Like all of these kind of this level of rigor that's missing, rather than just like, okay, we've got an idea, let's just do it. And then we find out in 18 months' time when we've built this giant white elephant that no one wants it, or there's no business model behind it, or we can't actually deliver it, or whatever it might be.
Yeah. And it's concerning how common that is, right?
Yeah. Look, that's one of my motivations for consulting and even this podcast. So that's why I'm trying to tease this out, is go, how do we, so if you're a leader, if
I can share a little bit of a story from back when I started in innovation to now. And I mean, there may be people who watch this who worked with me right way at the beginning who say, oh, good, she gets it now. Because I remember being in rooms with people talking about customer problems. And the majority of the room was saying, well, no, because we're doing this for us. We need to solve our problems as a business. And I look back now and I want to slap myself from 10 years ago and say, no, like if it doesn't solve a customer problem, no customer will use it and it will go nowhere. It doesn't matter what your business's strategic priorities are. If the person you need to engage with this solution, whether they're paying for it or using it in another way, if they don't want it, if it doesn't solve their problem, you're absolutely wasting your time. And so I think there's certainly been an improvement there. There is maturity there in more organizations. We're starting to see people understand it. But if we could, I guess, have the rigor around the process where every single innovation can so clearly define what that problem is that it's out there to solve, and create a good succinct summary on a page of how it's going to go to market and how it's going to work, would be miles ahead of where we are today.
Yeah, I'm going to go slightly off piste here. If you're in the trenches, if you were Gretchen from 15 years ago and you were in the same rooms and the same discussions, how do you initiate change? How do you help shape an organization from within when you may not feel like you're necessarily in a position of power or influence to do so?
Look, storytelling is incredibly powerful. So, people who are really trying to drive that change in a complex organization that may be a little resistant to genuine innovation, I'd encourage you to seek out stories of breakthrough innovations and really explain them to people to get them on board. And my favorite example is a little bit dated now, but I used to often talk about originally the iPod. Obviously, that's very outdated now. But let's say having music on your phone. These concepts didn't come about because people came up with the idea. They came about because people were asking potential customers about what annoyed them. And if you're going for a run back in the day with a Discman, it was a nightmare because it's constantly skipping and it just didn't work. It was completely impractical.
Yep.
And those problems led to some of the greatest innovations of our lifetime. But it's because they followed a process and they were really curious and customer centric. So I think, for anyone who's feeling like they're struggling to break through, just do your research, dig around online and find as many examples as you can of innovations that no one possibly could have just dreamed up through an ideation session.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great advice, and that's good inspiration. You're right. I think back to your point around this notion of design thinking and innovative thinking has actually come a long way, and probably largely thanks to a lot of tech organizations are actually shifting the needle on how organizations can operate and how they can actually design value for the consumers and their organization and get that win-win rather than designing for us or designing for them. It's designing for the collective us.
Yeah, exactly. And there are so many examples of great win-win. If you can really meet the customer's need, then your business will grow. So it's a no-brainer when you do it well.
Yeah, for sure. So I'd like to switch now a little bit to something that I know you are incredibly well versed in and passionate about, which is about workplace wellbeing and employee health. So given your background, your experience, your role, your previous roles, I want to talk and sort of go into this into some detail. But if we talk about the relationship between the health of people and their employer, and then we might talk about their insurer and broker and all the kind of stakeholders. But employee wellbeing, and particularly in Australia, why why do we see some organisations, or many organisations, particularly large organisations, who focus on workplace health, actually small organisations as well, that's not fair to them, work on workplace strategies and things that they think will help improve the health or improve the whatever their motivation is, help make their employees healthier? Why do so many organisations fail to move the needle on playing an active role in the health and well-being of their employees? Or why actually, maybe they have an impact, but quite a lot of the time it's possibly negative rather than positive in terms of driving burnout and some of these mental health challenges and whatnot. So I'm keen to understand a little bit about why so many get it wrong. How do employees struggle to improve the health of and well-being of their employees?
Look, there's a lot to talk about there. I could probably talk for a few days, but I'll do my best to boil it down. Look, one big factor differentiating Australia from say markets like the States is the insurance environment. So, in America, employers are very, very motivated to spend money on their employees' health because it will directly reduce their insurance premiums, or at least mitigate the risk of their premiums going up. So there's a real buy-in, and they get rewarded for action, not just for results. So they keep going. So that's clearly a very different health system. That's not something we're dealing with here. But I think there are lots of different reasons why it hasn't quite worked in Australia. If I go back to when employee health and wellbeing first burst onto the scene, it was started with the best intentions, but it kind of missed the mark. The focus was on things like boot camps and fun runs and even lunchtime yoga, where the fit and healthy people were there in a heartbeat, but they would have been there anyway, whether the employer was funding it or not. And the people who really needed the behaviour change were quite intimidated. So they became programs really for the worried well, and they didn't resonate with the broader workforce or with the people who needed help the most. So there was that lack of targeting. And arguably there is still a lack of targeting, but the programs have become at least a little bit more diverse and a little bit broader than they were initially. And from the boot camp phase of the early 2000s, it moved into a real digital phase in employee health and wellbeing. And I've been thinking about this one. I do wonder if the shift to digital just happened too soon before the tech really had the capabilities that we needed to have. So there was a lack of personalisation. They were really quite broad wellbeing portals. They were normally, via a browser rather than via an app when they first came to market. One size fits all. And so again, they just alienated people. There were step challenges for the worried well, or even the ones that had quite good content libraries. They just weren't drawing people in. There was that lack of targeting, so there was a lack of resonance, so people didn't really feel like it was for them and they didn't engage. Two other factors that are still a bit of an issue today would be data. So there's a massive lack of data to drive informed decisions about what an organisation needs to invest in for the health of their people. Most organisations probably couldn't articulate what their main health risks are in their people and what their kind of health and behaviour change priorities are. So there's a gap there that's pretty easy to fill. A proactive organisation can definitely fix that one quite quickly. And another challenge is the people in the roles. So this initially was a bit of a side hustle for someone in the HR department who had a passion for health and wellbeing. And we have progressed from there. It's often a dedicated role now, but it's still not usually based on people with the background in allied health or behaviour change. It is often someone who wanted progression and was working in a broader HR role and gets excited about employee health and wellbeing. I would say the majority of clients I work with, the person in that role doesn't have a health and wellbeing background, which is a real challenge because you can't make informed decisions if you don't really have that deeper understanding. You end up being quite easily led by providers, which leads to far more reactive and less strategic initiatives.
Okay, so let's unpack that a little bit. Back to, I think, the first point around motivation being, and for those following along, insurance markets in the US, your health insurance in particular is generally paid for by your employer, and they are risk-rated policies. So the healthier your employees are, the more attractive your health insurance premiums are as an organisation on behalf of your employees, right? So there's a direct financial incentive to have a healthy workforce, and that's one of the main reasons why we've seen the likes of behemoths like Amazon, who have an enormous workforce, invest into these whole health streams, right? It's not because that there's financial incentive to do so and make sure that they've got a healthy and well workforce. If those incentives don't exist in Australia, which they don't, for the context for Australia, well, maybe the incentives exist in a different way, but in Australia, health insurance premiums are community rated, which means that you can't discriminate based on the health and or wellness of an employee or a workforce. Then what's the incentive for employers to have a well and healthy workforce?
Why bother?
Why bother?
Yeah, and look, different organisations see this quite differently. A lot of organisations will talk about productivity and absenteeism, and that is a big part of it. You know, if you think about you with a headache versus you feeling well, you're more productive when you're well. If you think about you going to doctor's appointments and managing a chronic condition versus you not managing a chronic condition, you're clearly more productive. So even without particularly good ways to measure productivity, we know that everyone is more productive when they're healthy and well.
Yep.
So there is an emphasis on that. Reduced absenteeism is a tricky one. A lot of organisations will say that that's why they're investing in health and well-being, but it's a slippery slope using that as a success metric, because there are so many variables. You know, if you have a horrendous flu season, it'll absolutely destroy your metrics, unrelated to your health and wellbeing strategy.
Yep.
But a really key motivator for organizations, specifically in probably the last 5 years, I would argue, you know, once we started to get partway through COVID and we talked about the Great Resignation, which wasn't as significant in Australia as in other regions, but it still happened. And that's when health and wellbeing became critical as part of a people strategy around talent. So attract and retain the right talent. And it's also when employees' expectations really shifted. So there was all of a sudden that, okay, cool that I have a job, but what's in it for me? So, you know, that aligns to the shift to working from home, but it also aligns to the increase in Gen Z in the workforce as well. They have very different expectations to other people in the workforce, and they're pushing their employers to meet these expectations.
Yeah, okay, that's really interesting. So if you think about market forces, a low unemployment rate, which theoretically should mean it's an employee market, should mean that the employers are looking for additional ways to attract and retain good talent. So that should therefore drive more innovation, investment into the health and well-being of employees or corporate health, which theoretically you said should reduce absenteeism, should increase productivity. Again, like you said, it's difficult to quantify some of these things because people get sick. There's a flu season, you know, wipes out, et cetera, et cetera. So is that, and I guess if you can't always just pull financial levers to attract and retain staff, and like you said, the expectations of what people are looking for from their employer has changed or is changing, then do we think we've got a new benchmark and employers are going to continue to invest more and more into the health and well-being of their staff?
We're at a really interesting point in Australia right now where we're seeing more and more data showing that employees do have unmet needs. You know, they're struggling, they're delaying seeking medical care, sometimes because they can't afford it, sometimes because they don't have the time to go and get the care that they need. People are struggling to fund childcare. People are struggling to look after aging parents and young children at the same time. There's you know, general deterioration in mental health. There's a lot going on that people are struggling with. We sometimes talk about it as if it's kind of this crisis wave where things keep compounding and compounding, and people are genuinely doing it quite tough right now. So there's a real opportunity for employers to step up and do more. And if you think about investing, I don't know, we'll use rough numbers. If you imagine you invested between 200 and 300 per person in really meaningful support, so maybe giving them access to telehealth so they're not delaying seeking medical medical care, and a couple of targeted initiatives that they might engage in. If you did that, you could really change someone's life. Or if you gave them a pay rise of $300, they'd laugh at you. So there's definitely an opportunity. The question is whether businesses are really going to grasp that opportunity and run with it, because at the same time, organizations are under pressure to do more with less. So it's a challenging time to put a really compelling proposition on the table. Even if that proposition is actually quite cost efficient, the optics of putting something really new on the table aren't always great. So it'd take a brave organization to take that step. But if I had a crystal ball, I'd say the organization that takes it will reap the benefits in the talent market.
So maybe that also, I think it does link back to some of the points you were raising earlier around, we kind of started with, it was the worried well who engaged in workplace wellbeing. And from a corporate perspective, almost say like tick a box. Yes, we care about the health and wellbeing of our people. Then you've also got, I guess, people who this might have started as an interest. They're in a role within HR, so they're not necessarily health and wellbeing specialists. They've got a technical background in human resources or whatever it might be, and they might be genuinely interested. So if the system in organisations is not necessarily set up and it becomes if it's a discretionary budget line that's hard to measure the ROI, like who is the employer that's going to invest and reap the benefits of this? Is it going to be, like we're seeing now, probably, I'm going to make a hypothesis here, that global organisations that have a workforce in Australia might be more accustomed to spending money on workplace wellbeing because of the system that they come from in the US, as an example?
Yeah, multinationals are definitely the first to invest more in employee health and wellbeing. So multinationals tend to have quite generous benefits plans, and tech companies, because they're competing, even if they are an Australian tech company, they're competing against all of the multinationals and the American tech giants for talent. So they really have to play the same game, even if they're based here. But I would argue it almost comes back to where we started right at the beginning, talking about the perfect innovation. And it's about employers really engaging with their people and understanding, it's exit interviews, it's hiring interviews. Why did you decide to take this role if someone does accept an offer? It's really understanding what's driving those decisions. Because we know, particularly with Gen Z, it's more than just the salary. There's a lot else that's driving that decision making. So it's up to organizations to be curious and understand what the needs and wants of their people are, so that they can get rid of a lot of wasted investment and then refocus that on what people actually need to support them. Okay.
I'm going to bring it together now back with insurance. And in the Australian market, like we said, there is community rating, there are barriers that the employer may have less financial and commercial incentive to have a healthier workforce, or less directly attributable sort of, I invest this dollar and I get this much back in productivity or insurance premiums or whatever it may be in Australia. But we have seen the likes of Medibank in particular in Australia publicly say that it is a core focus pillar for them is corporate health. Now, I say corporate health as corporate insurance. So for corporate insurance in Australia, there's a number of ways you can do that. If you work at an organisation, they may have a partnership with a health insurer and you can get X% off your premiums, or they might come in and do flu shots or whatever it is. But you also have these kind of subsidised and part subsidised corporate markets. Why do you think, where the employer pays all or some of the premiums on behalf of their employees, why do you think the likes of Medibank and others have said publicly that this is a growth area for them? What's driving that? And what do you think the role of the insurer is beyond just providing financial protection to kind of help improve the health and well-being of employees?
Yeah, so as an insurer, it's a beautiful space to play. It's great. I mean, you think about it, a win is a group of individuals rather than a single individual. So it's great from a business development point of view. It's great from a risk point of view, because you get to pull the risk within that group context. So if you have a large organization, you would have some very, very kind of low-level claimers or people who don't claim at all in that organization, which is very rare in health insurance. Most people who pay for their policy are pretty motivated to use that policy one way or another. And so with the corporate environment, you have a different level of utilization would be one way to explain it. But you also have a really good opportunity to innovate, to pilot new concepts within that nice ring-fenced environment within a corporate. And that's always been quite motivating for health insurers to have kind of a safe place to try new things in one corporate environment. So if you imagine you have an employer who has great engaging comm strategies as an employer of choice already, then you know that you have a really good vehicle to use to take a new proposition or a behaviour change proposition to members and see how much of an impact you can have, and then use that as a case study to grow the initiative. So it's a really nice place to test and learn. And I realise as I'm saying that might sound scary to the organisations. It shouldn't be. Like, it is absolutely an opportunity. None of these propositions do harm. They absolutely do good. It's just a matter of how much good they do. So it's an opportunity to be an early adopter and really give more back to your people without having to overinvest yourself. So there's a lot of what's in it for the insurers. I think you asked about the opportunity and insurers have as well. It's easier. Easy is probably a big word. It's a little more straightforward to impact the behaviours of the people in that population as well, because you have more levers. You have the corporate comms levers, you have your own insurer levers, so you can drive behaviour change, I guess, a little bit more impactfully than you could with your general population. So if you think about an insurer like Medibank with their digital platform, all members have access to that, but you deliver that in a corporate environment and you can start feeding into it in multiple different ways. So you can really drive engagement, and then obviously more engaged users become stickier. Even if they leave that employer, they may choose to stay with you as an insurer because they've had a great experience on that platform, and you have an opportunity over time to improve their health and health behaviours.
Okay. It's a great response. Thank you. We've also, we're focused a lot on health insurance. I know you're across the life insurance sector as well. Very different dynamics in that sector. And I know in Australian context anyway, superannuation forms a large part, which is essentially group policies. They are grouping risk and manage that. But they do offer, as a result, they have group products that they sell through corporates as well. There are some subsidised life insurance products in the Australian context. But is there also a role here for life insurers because they should have, theoretically, they should also have a vested interest in healthy workforces or healthy Australians, because they live longer. Commercially, that means they pay premiums for longer.
And the opportunity there is, it's almost better because there's a little bit more of a narrower focus. So in health insurance, you have so many different types of claims. There can be someone who's just repeat short hospitalizations. There can be someone who just utilizes all of their extras every year but doesn't touch the rest. And then there can be those, high claimants with complex illnesses, where in life insurance, really the focus is on serious illness. You just don't want someone to be so unwell that they're off work for an extended period of time or that it's terminal. So that narrow focus does create a great opportunity for innovation. One of the challenges with life insurance is that they tend to have less touch points with their members. So it's harder to reach members with these different ways to change their behaviour and drive healthier outcomes. Which again is where the corporate group comes in. You have a much better chance to engage with the members when it is in that corporate group setting. And I'd almost add another insurer to the list. I'd say I work a lot with workers' comp as well, and they are really driving innovation. They are calling out to providers to bring innovative solutions to the table. They're quick to pilot. They're really quick to test and learn, and then to expand off the back of successful pilots. Previously I've seen a lot of pilots just go to pilot and die, where in the workers' comp environment, we definitely see that pilots are continued ongoing if they're successful and those metrics are really clear. So, again, I guess that's the process coming into play, setting really clear metrics. And if a pilot's successful, then continuing on after the pilot, and both health and life insurance could learn a lot from that.
And I wonder what's driving that in workers' comp. Is there a burning platform? We are seeing workers' comp and life insurance, actually in health insurance, I guess particularly recently have all come under strain, probably more so workers' comp and life insurance from a mental health claims perspective. I think we've seen life insurance mental health claims double in the past. I'm going to make a period of time up, but probably less than a decade. I think workers' comp, there's enormous strain with mental health claims impacting that as well. Are these sorts of things that create the burning platform for them to innovate and actually move faster?
I think that's partly it, definitely. I mean, the current model is not sustainable, so it's about attacking it from all angles to figure out what can be done, what can be done to impact the model, but what also can be done to impact human behaviour. Mm-hmm. But I wonder if in workers' comp, part of the reason that pilots or that innovation in general is being really focused on is because it's about the organisation more than the individual. So if you can impact safety in an organisation, be that physical safety or psychological safety, if you can impact that safety, then you can reap the rewards ongoing. I guess it's less reliant on humans with all of our flaws and our inability to change our behavior, no matter how much we want to sometimes. So there's, it's easier to influence organizational processes and frameworks and structure than it is to influence a bunch of individuals.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And if you think about safety versus health and well-being and the delineation there as well, is if you can make a safer workplace, the return on investment for that for workers' comp can be material, and it can be reasonably, it can have an impact reasonably quickly.
Yes,
as well, much,
right?
You can initiate change, and the payoff for that, you could almost reap the rewards for that in a pretty short period of time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Employee general health and well-being, probably less or more difficult to articulate the ROI, as we've spoken about the ROI, but also initiating changes, and those changes, it's not necessarily, think about a workplace. If you're making it a safer workplace, and that might be putting railings in or anti-sticky floors. I mean, I don't know workplace, but there are things that you could do that are quite tangible and material. Yeah. Whereas if you're putting in, offering your employees telehealth consults, then that the ROI or them being healthier might be a bit harder to sort of get that ROI in a short period of time, because they're more focused on their long-term health and well-being.
Yeah, and I think when it comes to a bunch of individuals, there are so many variables. So even if someone were fully engaged with the program you offered them as a health insurer, and they jumped at every opportunity and they did everything you said, that doesn't come with any certainty that they're not going to become unwell and they're not going to claim. You're reducing risk, which is the aim of the game. But in reality, there's genetics and there are all these other factors at play that you just cannot control. So I guess there is a limit of what can be influenced by these programs run by health and life insurers.
Yeah. Okay. So then we might then talk about another stakeholder, which is brokers, and obviously something that you're reasonably close to is, and many leaders in different verticals of insurance and different lines of business may or may not understand the role of brokers and how significant they are in different verticals of insurance. In general, in commercial insurance, it's very commonplace. In other markets, when I say other geographic markets, the US, UK, Europe, etc., brokers play a very active role in many lines of insurance.
Yeah.
In Australia, in health and life, it might be a little bit different from other markets. So I'd love to understand a little bit about the role that brokers play, but then particularly around what role do they and can they play in the health and well-being of employees.
Okay. So if I focus more on the health and well-being component, I see brokers as very much an advocate for the organisation. So they will help you as an employer to unlock funding from various insurers, so really help you to access funding. Sometimes you may have had the funding anyway, and they'll just help you to understand that and access it. And often they can help you access more funding than you would ever be able to access if you had a direct relationship with the insurer. And if you have one broker across multiple lines of insurance, then you have an opportunity to bring that funding together, so you have a much bigger pot to drive far more impactful interventions. So you can be a lot smarter with how you grow your health and wellbeing program by using that insurer funding and the broker relationships to really drive the best possible funding outcomes for you as a business. But I would say it goes beyond that as well. There are two other things on my mind. One is that brokers tend to drive innovation. They're close to the insurers, so they always know what's new. And I mean, in my organization, it's also that the brokers are close to other internal teams, so they really understand what's possible in quite a broad environment from a number of different providers. So they can, they may not suggest specific solutions to a client because they're not the subject matter expert, but they're very aware of what's out there and can bring the right people into the room to talk to you so that you start to understand where your organization could go. And that comes back to often not having someone with a health background in the role in an organization. A broker can connect you to people who can really help you to make far more informed decisions, or even help you to bring together the analytics so that you can start making more informed decisions. So I see them really helpful that way. And then a new trend would be, it's not new in all lines of insurance, but there's definitely a shift towards brokers playing more of a role in claims advocacy. So once someone's on claim, really driving that experience to try and get them back to work as soon as possible. So it's a better outcome for the insurer and it's a better outcome for the employer, so you have the person back at work. And that's a gap that had been there historically, and brokers have really filled that void and are helping to drive better outcomes, which is working really well. And I mean, in the end, most people on claim, they don't want to be on claim. No one wants to be unwell, so it really is a win-win-win, getting people back to health and back to function sooner.
Nice one. So I'm then curious, over your time in working in corporate health, what are you most excited about? What gets you excited about in terms of it from, I guess, linking innovation to corporate health? Where are you seeing green shoots? Where are you seeing opportunities? Where are you seeing things that are getting you excited to go, I can see the light, not the light at the end of the tunnel here, but I can see things emerging. I can see patterns. I can see changes happening that are leading to positive outcomes.
One of the most exciting things I've started to see happening over the last 6 to 12 months is organizations pausing to understand their current state before they jump into action. Historically it was a really reactive space. Now we're seeing organizations wanting to do a bit of analysis on where their health risk is, where their gaps are. So if they're a multinational, they want to understand what they're doing in each region around the world so that they can see where there are gaps, or maybe set global minimum standards so that they can make sure no one is missing out, which is great. It comes back to that piece around unmet needs. So there's more of a focus on making sure there's not something unseen that's actually quite important. So that's hopeful. And I would say the other thing I'm most optimistic about is that we've learnt from, going all in on fitness, but not holistic wellbeing. And then we've learned from digital, and now we're in a position to put the two together. So, the ideal solution is a combination of digital so that it's scalable, but personal so that we really can engage with people as individuals and understand who they are, and that they may be a little bit different to the person they sit next to, and that's okay. Meet them where they are as an individual and help them to change.
Very good. Thank you. And if I'm just sort of, again, going off piste here, but if we look at the spectrum of health and well-being, from an employee and corporate perspective, if it's from yoga classes through to EAP, kind of a spectrum. I know different lines of health, but in terms of sort of proactive, preventative, right through to reactive and immediate need to kind of help the problem right now, where do you think the biggest opportunities are for employers to make a real impact, and where are the growth areas happening in terms of investment?
So a big opportunity would be in that, multiple risk factors, maybe already diagnosed with a chronic condition, but still, definitely capable of working, most days, but there's that, that I guess we could call them the almost unwell. And it's a really quite high proportion of the workforce. So focusing on those people and just helping, even just reducing one risk factor is enough to make a difference to someone's health. So, that's where the opportunity is. Where we're seeing organizations already, I guess, shift the dial and start to think a little bit differently is taking a segmented approach to the workforce. So thinking, what are we doing for our caregivers? What are we doing for our aging workforce? What are we doing for Gen Z? And that segmented approach is very important. We're seeing that shift, and it's reassuring to see that organizations are starting to realize it's, once it's size fits all will never make a big difference.
Okay. Well, that's good. No, well, that's positive. That's really good that there's green shoots, I think, around data, digital, incentive, expectations of their workforce, all of these things converging into what should be segmentation is the other thing, personalisation, I think, into probably a brighter future for corporate health. And when you start to bring those things together, you can probably see why the likes of Medibank and others have sort of going, they can see the opportunity as well as they go, do you know what, I think there's a real opportunity here to have an impact.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, even just the workforce is changing, like as we have the boomers moving out of the workforce and Gen Z moving in, it really just shifts the shape of the workforce. And so things that may not have worked in the past, they'll work because we're talking to different people. So, it's about responding to the expectations and the wants of the workforce, which is exciting.
Yeah, it's really interesting when I think about that. If you think about the average generation is usually around 15 years, but in the workforce where you've actually got a generation coming in and a generation going out, that's sort of double the impact, right? So one generation is almost two generations in terms of impact. So it sounds like we've got an exciting time ahead in corporate health. And I know where I'm going to go after this call is go and try and find ways to invest in the future of corporate health, because it sounds like there's some exciting opportunities there. But I might just sort of pull it all together and I guess hand the mic to you to talk about a little bit about you and your experience and background and your current role and I guess we've sort of talked about what you're getting excited about, but for those who want to continue a conversation with you or your employer, would love to know the best way to get in touch.
Easy, thank you. Look, I'm sure it's not a surprise from everything we've talked about today that I've always worked in health and wellbeing and behaviour change, and have a background in exercise science, and then came into the corporate world working on health and wellbeing. And I've done that both in the employee setting, so for workforces, but also in the general population within health insurance. So, I've established corporate wellbeing programs for health insurers, worked in digital health startups, which was a fabulous experience and really kind of bolted in everything I'd learned about innovation in different settings. And my role now is leading advisory for Mercer Marsh Benefits in the Pacific. And that title can be a little bit tricky to understand exactly what we do. So I'll drill down into it a little bit. But we deliver a combination of consulting services, training, and digital tools and solutions, and other solutions, both on-site and virtual, that help to address employee health and wellbeing, and also employee benefits, which is an emerging area in Australia. It's certainly not big business here yet, but we also work with multinational clients. So we're learning from them and I guess bringing what's happening overseas into Australia so that people can really compete in that global talent market. So that's what I do. Happy to keep the conversation going. So the easiest way for anyone to get hold of me is to reach out via LinkedIn, and we can get in touch and keep it going from there.
Wonderful. Well, Gretchen, look, it's been wonderful to talk to you. I can't believe where the time's gone, to be completely honest. It just felt like, I know you and I sort of do catch up sporadically, and it feels like we've had this chat 1,000 different times. It just feels like another one of our conversations. So it was nice to hit record on it. But look, I really appreciate your time and your expertise and your willingness to share. I think there's lots to take away from this. I think from curiosity process to right through to what's exciting about the future of employee health and wellbeing, I think is, and the role of insurers, the role of brokers, and kind of all and sundry, I think is very exciting, and very appreciative of your time. A huge thank you for joining us.
Excellent. Thanks for having me. I enjoyed it.